Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest SAM Learning Mat Leaders Forum. My name is Stephanie King, and I am the Commercial Director here at SAM Learning, and I am joined by our Regional Director, Craig Hendelman, who, time permitting, will be taking questions at the end of today's forum. We are also delighted today to be joined by 3 guest speakers from different schools around the UK and abroad, so that we can start to consider the question of how ready are our schools for September? This is an open forum, so please do feel free to ask any questions that you may have. To do so, click on the orange arrow on the control bar, which is found on the right-hand side of your screen, and type your question into the questions box. So it looks like everybody has arrived, so we're going to begin. So the Guardian reported last week that a leaked guidance from the government shows that all children will be expected to go back to school in September on a full timetable, with secondary students kept in COVID-secure year groups to limit the transmission of the virus. And they say this because they are keen to avoid a vague and woolly start to the new academic year after months of uncertainty. And regrettably, that word uncertainty is one that lots of schools and mat leaders have weighed down on their shoulders recently, today, and by the looks of it, will likely have to carry that weight for some time longer. But it's not just the question of whether schools will reopen fully in September that poses an issue. Another issue that we will inevitably have to face is the gargantuan task of putting together an effective catch-up plan and then successfully delivering that to all students, regardless of whether school doors open to all or not. So while we can be certain that the issues we foresee today will see significant demands on already limited teacher time, we can also say with a fair amount of certainty that new issues will be identified in the months leading up to and the months after September 2020. In our conversations with schools, a lot of discussions are taking place around how they are going to catch up the 2020-2021 GCSE cohort to give them the maximum chance of success in their upcoming exams, but less so are talking about the impact of taking in new Year 7 students who have had a significant disruption to their lives already by not completing their studies at Key Stage 2, but who also will make that huge leap to secondary school with no SATs data for their new teachers to utilise at Key Stage 3. We do, however, have a clearer idea about how the government aim to help schools, with £1 billion going to schools to help pupils catch up after lockdown, albeit only £650 million of that will go directly to state schools, which amounts roughly to an additional £90 per pupil. So here is a question for you all. How confident are you that your school or schools are prepared for September? If you are all like the schools and mats we surveyed recently, you may very well feel that you have a lot of work ahead of you to reach a level of confidence that you are comfortable with. We asked a selection of schools and mats, including those that both do and do not use SAM Learning currently, and the general consensus is that the coming months are among the most significantly challenging in recent memory. Schools are underfunded and oversubscribed. Teachers are leaving the profession in record numbers for a number of reasons, and the ones who stay are pushed to the absolute limit, working with what little time and resource they have. But at the same time, the surveys show that the schools that use not one, but a combination of EdTech systems felt significantly more confident that they were in a good position to both identify gaps in September and then subsequently narrow and close them. It would also seem that the key to any successful catch-up plan for schools has one overarching requirement. Above and beyond not breaking the bank for schools, it absolutely must be manageable for teachers to deliver. And manageability is something that we take very seriously here at SAM Learning. In all the 25 years since we started supplying EdTech to UK schools, we have never known, even before COVID-19 hit, such challenges to schools in delivering outstanding outcomes. Both myself and the other directors here at Sam Learning have all been working behind the scenes, not only with schools, but with other edtech companies, to make sure that each and every school has the option to purchase a number of resources that work incredibly well together to deliver a hugely effective and successful catch-up support package. Because alone we are strong, but together we are immovable. And to find out who those companies are that want to see your school succeed, and not just to see your school name on their customer database, I would absolutely suggest that when in discussions with a salesperson, you ask one very simple question. And that question is this: to get the most out of your system, what other systems should I be looking at to run alongside it? As powerful as any edtech system is, including Sam Learning, any company that has a realistic grasp on modern day education will tell you that while their system is a solution to many different problems and will indeed have a significant impact on those individual challenges, no one system is the be-all and end-all solution. We openly speak to schools and MAT leaders on a daily basis. And a lot of these schools, both current subscribers to SAM and prospective subscribers, realise that while SAM Learning is fantastic by using SAM Learning alongside other systems like GCSE Pod, Hegarty eMath, Oak Academy, BBC Bitesize, etc., it creates a harmonious ecosystem of teaching, learning and assessment through EdTech. And it is this ecosystem, this holistic bundle of impactful, engaging and evidence-based tech that is likely to be one of the strongest options for schools preparing for September. I now want to open this forum to our three guest speakers today because I feel it is hugely important for us as an educational community to communicate openly and effectively with each other, to share best practice and to celebrate each other's wins, no matter how big or small they seem at first. We are all on this road together, albeit at different starting points. But what we can be sure of is that if we stick together and learn off each other, no child, school, or teacher will be left behind. Our three guest speakers today are Leslie Welsh, head teacher at George Pinder School, Kate Bayman, Senko at Eden Park High School, and Nicole Haynes, vice principal at GEMS Westminster School. So welcome all this afternoon. And firstly, for the benefit of our attendees today, I would like you all to give us a quick overview of the context of your school. So we'll start with yourself, Leslie.
Yeah, so we are an 11 to 16 fully inclusive school in the south of Scarborough, in the middle of a council estate called Eastfield. We've got 640 students on roll. We've got smaller year groups at the top end, but we're now managing to get a healthier intake, and it's stable throughout our new year 7 to year 9, although we do have a significant issue locally with in-year movement. 39% of our children are in receipt of the pupil premium, and 53% of the cohort live in the most disadvantaged areas on the Idaki scale. The school did have a judgment of serious weaknesses in June 2017, and we began the process of academisation and finally crossed the line in March 2019 with Hope Learning Trust from York as our sponsors. I took up post as principal in April 2019, and I'm the 4th head teacher in 5 years.
Thank you, Leslie. And Kate, could you give me an overview of your school?
Hi there. Yes, Eden Park High School's in Beckenham. We're a brand new free school, so we've only been on the site for a year. We've actually been open for 3 years, so we currently have year 7, year 8 and year 9, and we're due to have our first Key Stage 4 cohort whenever we return properly. We're part of a greater trust. Most of the schools are in the area, in the Beckenham area, but we do have one school in Canterbury. The trust is made up of secondary and primary schools. We have a really high number of PPG students in our school, and we strive for equality for all. And as such, we have an extended day which lasts until 4:45, where students do homework on site as well.
Fabulous. And Nicole, yourself.
Hello everyone, my name's Nicole Haynes. I'm the Vice Principal here at GEMS Westminster Russell Kamer. I'm part of the GEMS group, which has 48 schools based in the UAE, but is one of the largest global education providers in the world. We're the only GEMS school based in Russell Kamer. The school's been open since September 2013. I've been in the UAE for 2.5 years, where previously I was a principal in a girls' school in Islington. We are in the most northern emirate, which is one of the 7 emirates. We're an all-through school from reception to year 13. We have over 3,300 students, where the majority of students English as a second language, and the majority of students come from an Arabic heritage. The students sit IGCSEs, International AS and International A level. Thank you.
Thank you. And to start things off, I wanted to ask you, Leslie, as a head teacher of the challenges that you've faced up until now through COVID-19 closures, and how have you been overcoming them and plan to overcome them in the months ahead?
I mean, the first thing I think is that with 2 days' notice, we had to come up with a blended learning approach for our school to ensure that students could access resources from home. So there was a Herculean effort by my assistant vice principal to create a series of Google Drives and to get colleagues to fill them with resources for students to access online. And we wanted those to be followed up with tasks on Google or Sam Learning or Maths Watch. After the first 2 weeks of school closure, not closure, and then Easter, and following some feedback that we got from students, families and staff, we became aware that students were feeling overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of resources and were reacting by therefore not completing any tasks. So we introduced checklists to guide them in a more uniform way on the Google Drive for each subject, for each teacher, and that also allowed for more differentiation and allowed us to respond better to the needs of individual classes. One big challenge, and possibly one that we didn't really expect, was the training need for students and staff within a 3-day period. I think sometimes in schools we can be guilty of thinking that students truly are digital natives and they can cope with any kind of technology. But I think they use technology in a very different way to professionals, and certainly to educational professionals. And equally, our trust are very mindful of workload, so we didn't want to create unnecessary work before any announcements were made. So in school, we'd only ask departments to consider uploading revision materials for year 11 before the 18th of March. So we had to have some very swift staff briefings showing how to upload resources into shared drives, plus a series of assemblies to show students how to log on to the shared drives. We created a special area of the school website to make the initial link straightforward, and then showed students how to log in using their school network account details. We have migrated more to Google Classroom throughout this period, and we're now holding training sessions for staff who are less digitally adept than some of our Google innovators. We do think that this work's vital though, and we must ensure that all students and staff are fully aware of how to use the systems in case of lockdown locally, or in case of students or staff having to self-isolate. And we need teachers to be able to use those systems alongside their day-to-day teaching and learning from September. One of our biggest challenges has actually been access to devices. All schools are obviously different, but as a school, we personally only had access to a couple of sets of school laptops, and we had teachers who didn't have access to a school device, let alone students who didn't have access to a device at home. So we ordered 2 sets of Chromebooks. Goodness knows where they are, but we're still waiting for them. We asked for laptops through the DFE scheme, and we're also waiting for those still to arrive with a week to go before the end of term. So we reached out to our local community, and we're delighted to receive 25 from local businesses who gave away some of their old machines. We do know that there are 25% of students in our community who are only using smartphones to access their work, and that has an impact on the volume of work they complete or can engage with. But we're still hoping to do more work on this in the months ahead, so that all students can have off-site access to a suitable device to fully engage in our online learning offer. Another challenge has been curriculum coverage. Initially, we worked on consolidating content that had already been taught, and we had to change to new content. So it's been really important to think about how existing resources could be evolved so that we could share that content with students without it being too dry. And Stephanie, you've already mentioned it today, but we had to be quite picky in terms of resources. So much has become available, particularly after the launch of the Oak Academy and the new bite-sized materials. Teachers have always been magpies, that's absolutely fine, there's no need to reinvent the wheel, but we want to frame all work that's set within our system, so we try to use a lot of links from the Google checklist. We've just had a series of line management meetings where we've asked departments to explain how their carefully planned curriculum can be delivered in a blended learning model over the next year. Couple more challenges. Safeguarding, of course, has been a challenge during this time, and we hope that our model of a text number that students can reach out to, plus regular links, letters, online assemblies, all of which signpost students to support networks, has been a force for good. And finally, relationships. They are the absolute framework that school life is built on. And it's been really challenging during these 14 weeks to deal with those. Many of our students wouldn't choose to email a teacher or ask for support openly. So we've done lots of phone calls home, online support sessions so we can see students, and lots of personal touches. For example, miming to a song or handwriting postcards home, sending digital praise certificates at the end of each week. Anything really where we could reach out to students and remind them that we're here for them. And we are ending the year with a series of one-to-one form tutor appointments as a check-in and to try and get students school ready.
Thank you, Leslie. And what about yourself, Nicole? Your school is based over in the UAE. How have you had to adapt to recent events over the last few months?
I would say that we are probably in a very positive position. There was a national drive to ensure that all schools were ready to deliver remote learning. So at the beginning of March, we were given an indication that schools would close, and we were then tasked with formulating plans of what that would look like. Our spring break was brought forward so that the students would have 2 weeks holiday, and that gave us enough time to plan for remote learning, but also gave the teachers an opportunity to get upskilled in the various platforms. So in secondary, we use Google Classroom, and in primary, we use MS Teams. In the secondary school, because we were already using that for homework and for project-based learning, the transition wasn't too challenging for students or teachers. And in primary, it took some time to adapt to the new environment, but I would say that our students and teachers did adapt very quickly. After sort of 2 weeks of delivering RLP, which started on the 22nd of March, we were able to do a variety of briefings for parents, but also some questionnaires to identify how their children and they were coping with RLP. So what we realised, similar to my colleague there, is that the amount of work that was being delivered through our platforms was a bit overwhelming for students, and they weren't being able to complete all of the tasks. So we reduced the amount of work that was being delivered in lessons. In primary, we created No Screen Day Thursday, so that children could be doing creative arts projects. They would do some PE, they may have work that they may want to catch up on. But also what we did is we looked at a variety of sort of arts and crafts activities that they could do with their parents, so they could be away from the computer screen. We also, had to think about safeguarding. We had a dedicated email created called Care to Share, which basically was advertised to parents and students, and had, trained professionals at the other end of that in the event that there were any issues. There were a variety of videos and training materials that we provided to parents just to ensure that if they had any issues with getting onto the platforms that they felt supported. And also there was a 24-hour IT help desk, which again supported any sort of technical issues or login informations that they may had difficulty with. We also provided laptops, some school resources to about 40 of our families who may have had, several siblings that needed to log on at the same time. And so to provide that support for the families, we loaned 40 school laptops. Also through the government, there were a variety of initiatives in terms of Wi-Fi access for parents, and also we supported teachers who may not have had, adequate Wi-Fi support. We also provided that for them. Also, in addition to that, we tried to think about well-being. We know that the social isolation did impact not only on staff, but also on the students and their families. So we had things such as virtual concerts, we had virtual graduations, we have our counsellors on hand to be able to support either parents or students, providing weekly workshops on different themes of how to cope during social isolation. We had daily staff briefings so that teachers again could touch base with each other, and we also had the pastoral teams doing learning walks so that they could support any issues that might have arisen in class, but also to give reassurance to our teachers that they felt supported. What we did have, and I wanted to mention, is that we had an inspection as well, which was a national inspection where all schools were being inspected for distance learning to measure the quality of what we are doing, because we know that COVID is not about to finish anytime soon. They wanted to see that we are ready, that if in September we are delivering blended learning approach. The government wanted to see, what additional support schools across the country may need in order to ensure that we are ready for September. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Unfortunately, we've lost Kate. She's had a bit of a technical issue, so we're going to move on, and we will bring Kate back in when she's managed to get logged back into the system. So I'm just going to move on to the next question now, and I think it's plain to see that there are some significant challenges ahead for all schools around the globe at the moment. Now, your schools, regardless of location, have many things in common, and one of those is that you were all accustomed to using e-learning to support your students. Nicole, what challenges within your school have you effectively dealt with through the use of e-learning?
The two major, I think, challenges that we have had have been our SEN students. And with our SEN students, we have 115 across the school, and they are in 3 different categories: Wave 1, Wave 2, and Wave 3. Wave 3 being the most complex needs, those children that would usually have an EHCP plan. And really what we found is for some children, it was unfamiliar territory for them. And so what we would have to do is we may have had to look at other resources in terms of online resources which were more bespoke for their needs, or we would have had our SEN teachers providing some one-to-one support and taking them into a separate channel classroom to really give them that provision. In addition to that, if we felt that that wasn't adequate, then we would provide some printed materials, and parents would be able to come and collect that in order to support the ongoing progress and learning of those children. Some of the other challenges have been for our reception children, and that has been to do with their attention span and focus. And also a large proportion of our parents do not speak much English, and so therefore, in order for them to be co-tutors and understand, the delivery of the British curriculum has really been a significant challenge for them. And so we do understand how difficult it has been for them. So again, we have shortened maybe some of the lessons or the activities, or what we have done is provided recorded lessons so parents can keep going back to those recorded lessons. What I hadn't said before, all of our lessons by and large were delivered live, so we were delivering synchronous lessons, but they were all recorded. So what that meant is that if any parents had any difficulties, they then could go back to those resources or go back to those lessons and to be able to access that. So going forward, one of the key things for me for reopening is, although the plan is to only have 50% of our students in at any one time, is that our KG1 students, which would be our reception students, we would like to have in 100% of the time, because we understand how important it is in that early stage of their development in terms of early years. And the other side of that is for our grade 10, 11 and 12, well, our 11, 12 and 13, because obviously they have had no exams this year, and in terms of having that exam practice and having that really depth of learning from the teacher, we would again try to encourage and try to ensure that we could have them in more so, while the students would be on a blended learning approach.
Thank you, Nicole. And the same question to you, Leslie, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, well, we don't have textbooks, so without e-learning, I really have no idea how we would have coped with lockdown. There would have been a huge workload cost, a huge financial cost to providing paperwork for the entire school community. And the system that we have used has ensured that work could be really carefully differentiated to meet the needs of individual students across all their subjects. Workload's a huge issue for teachers always, but during lockdown, teaching colleagues have been wrestling with their own particular set of family circumstances. So, for example, caring responsibilities, homeschooling their own children, all whilst getting to grips with online learning. And at the same time, students and their families were clambering for feedback, and e-learning has really filled that gap. The immediacy of feedback from systems like Sam Learning meant that students felt that they knew if they were on the right tracks or not, and so the workload benefit for staff has been huge.
Fabulous. And earlier on in the forum, I spoke about creating a harmonious ecosystem of EdTech in school. You use a variety of systems, don't you, Leslie? Would you mind giving us, our attendees here today, a brief rundown of how these systems complement each other?
Yeah, absolutely. Our model has been to host resources on Google Drives and then use Sam Learning to check that knowledge and understanding of what's being taught. And we feel like that blended approach is perfect. Children go to the Google Drives to revise or to learn some new content from a link to a video, a PowerPoint, a resource, and then they're tested on it and check their understanding through Sam Learning. And that comes with all of those workload benefits for staff.
And one of the biggest challenges we face in education today is in closing the gap. Similar to Kate, you use Sam Learning amongst other systems in schools. How are you planning to use them to help narrow and close the gaps in student knowledge?
So over the summer holidays, teachers are already scheduling revision tasks using Sam Learning to keep students, I'll use the word warm, not as warm as where our other panelist is from, but to try and keep students warm. It won't be the same volume of work as we've already asked of our students during the school closure period, but 7 weeks of holidays after the last 14 unusual weeks mean we would really like to keep students ticking over now more than ever. We are going to repurpose our Google Drives over from September so that they'll become a one-stop shop for revision materials, and we're going to signpost those to students as part of our toolbox of recovery. All our departments are going to begin the school year by ragging the work that's been completed over lockdown with students, and we're well aware that many of our students have faced significant barriers in accessing their work. So it's not about imposing sanctions, but rather about asking them to be honest. What have you done or what haven't you done? And this is how you can now catch up. And then we can use Sam Learning to provide highly targeted individual support. And I think for me, that's the absolute beauty of Sam Learning. It's not a blunt tool. The last thing that we would want to do is to alienate those students who have actually done all of their work at home over the last 12 weeks. and completed all their tasks by spending the next 12 weeks going over that material again. And we simply don't have time for it in our schemes of learning. So through that careful use of SAM Learning, we can help to narrow the gap. The other thing, and we did this for the first time last year at George Pinder, is that our pupil premium lead ran a series of highly successful interventions using SAM Learning, and we intend to do the same this year. We'll use data from baseline testing in the first 3 weeks of the new academic year, and then we'll set up a series of intervention groups using SAM and set weekly additional tasks to support and challenge those young people to improve. And we link that work with increased parental contact and weekly meetings with students, and that helps them catch up and engage in their learning.
Thank you. And Nicole, if you wouldn't mind answering this question as well, please. I think Nicole is on mute. Are we able to unmute Nicole?
All right, yeah, there we go. Yeah, okay, great. So we use a variety of other resources along with SAM Learning, and we see it as different areas that complement each other. So for us, in terms of student catch-up and making sure that students are where they need to be at the start of the new academic year, we have provided summer work booklets, and that was really at request of the parents. Many of them know that they won't be travelling over the summer, and they wanted to ensure that the students were being occupied and have things to do, as we've already broken up for our summer break. So in effect, children are out of school for 2 months. So we've created booklets and also signposted to particular resources. So we use, along with SAM Learning, we use things like GCSE Pod, we use Bug Club, we use Rapid Read, Rockstar Maths, My Maths, and we use a range of Active Learn through Pearson, as well as tailor-made resources by our teachers. In addition to that, for our Year 11s and Year 12s, we have got them assigned on an extended project, GCSE Plus. So it's a project-based where they come up with their own research, and they do some analysis, and then they have to deliver a presentation. There are members of the senior leadership team who are also not travelling, so they're going to be mentoring those students throughout the holidays, so that they will guide them through that project. And that's really so that they develop those research and independent learning skills in preparation for sixth form. So as I just kind of summarise, I believe that SAM Learning for us has really been supportive in terms of formative assessment, as an end of topic test, whether it's a starter or a plenary in lessons, or that a lot of our children are just accessing SAM Learning to have additional resources for them to consolidate their learning from the classroom.
Thank you, Nicole. And I'm delighted to see that Kate's back with us. So Kate, could, just for the benefit of everybody who's here today, could you bring us up to speed as to how Eden Park's preparing for September?
Yes, hi Stephanie. We've had the luxury of, because we have an extended day, we've been using something called class charts, which we use anyway, where we set independent study time for the students. So luckily the students and the teachers were very au fait with that. We're going to continue to use that up until the end of term. So basically students are accessing each of their lessons at the time they would normally have them. They go into the class charts, which they're familiar with. They'll click onto their lesson and the work will be set. Now, we've found SAM Learning to be incredibly useful here, because one of the problems we found is generating the work and marking it and getting back to the students as quickly as possible. But obviously with SAM Learning, we can use the resources that self-mark. So we're actually going to use SAM Learning exclusively now until the end of term, so that staff can use that time to prepare for September, and therefore SAM Learning is actually marking as it goes. It's recording the data. We've got the data straight away. We're using something called EduKit, which is which is an app that students can download, because we're looking at safeguarding as well. And the safeguarding app allows students to tell us on a daily basis how they're doing. They click an icon. So for example, if it was a red frowny face saying that they were not having a good time, we can link resources that get sent immediately to the students. So we're really looking at the safeguarding aspect, the wellbeing aspect as well, but academically we're using Sam Learning because we feel that this gives us everything we need just to set the students up for the end of term before the summer.
And would you mind giving our attendees here today a brief rundown of how the various systems that you use complement each other?
Yeah, sure. We predominantly use Sam Learning at the moment for interventions, but we have got plans to use it across every lesson and as homework, a structured homework. At the moment, it's used quite fluidly by the staff. In interventions, I oversee the literacy interventions. So we use a number of different online platforms that we put together, and we create this really tight intervention. So we use something called Accelerated Reader, and that assesses the student's reading age, and then once they've got that reading age, they choose a selection of books they can read, and then they're tested online. So the students actually do literacy work via Sam Learning, and we found thousands of resources that we can use that are already on Sam Learning. But in some cases, for very particular children, we create personalised work for them, so we can add our own work as well. And then we use Accelerated Reader just as a kind of digital break, so they don't have to be on the in front of the screen for the whole time. We take the students out of their language lessons, so we also use Sam Learning to do, as in those sessions, to do some work in languages, so that they're not completely removed. They've still got some access to it, but the lesson predominantly focuses on literacy. And then, as I say, we use Accelerated Reader just to give them a time to read and just away from the screen. And we found that the combination works brilliantly as an intervention.
During one of our last webinars, Sam Learning was described as the ultimate toolkit for education. Kate, would you agree with this analogy, and why?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I mean, one of the things that's been overwhelming is the students' engagement and their love of Sam Learning. As I've mentioned, we have a large day, extended day up until 5:15. So you would think students wouldn't have an awful lot of time to use Sam Learning, but we find that the number of students using it is phenomenal. They use it after school, they use it at weekends, they use it in the holidays. I think they really enjoy the competitive side of it, creating their own avatar, and there's so many ways that they can use it. And I think one of the things that's really important is the students have autonomy on it. So the students, they can select what they want to do, they can interact with it, they can choose the subject, and this seems to be a winning combination. So yeah, we've found that it's once you introduce it into your schools, it just rolls and rolls and rolls because the students take it on independently.
And how about you, Leslie? What tools are you pulling out of the Sam Learning toolbox that are proving useful at this challenging time?
Well, just the whole thing, Stephanie, I'm a huge fan of Sam Learning, and I do agree that Sam Learning was already a go-to tool for setting and receiving class homeworks with all the huge workload benefits that entails. But the changes that have been made to Sam Learning over the last few years have made it into a really polished tool to fully engage with individual members of your class. And the ability to differentiate a task down to an individual level is revolutionary, whilst ensuring that teacher workload isn't compromised because of how straightforward Sam is. Kate's already mentioned it, but the wealth of resources on the site mean that teachers are always able to find a task that complements the work they're doing. And Activity Builder is also revolutionary for me. One of the biggest bugbears of teachers of minority subjects, so for example, some of the technology options or more vocational qualifications, is that there are never any off-the-shelf resources available to them from the biggest names. So for example, BBC Bitesize. So being able to design their own materials in such a user-friendly way is incredible for these staff. And in fact, lots of my staff have actually used their time working from home to get into Activity Builder, and it's really borne fruit for them. And also because our students are so used to the SAM learning interface, they can really interact with all their subjects through it. And the motivational aspects of SAM are massive, just as Kate's mentioned. And that's why we see that 99% of our school community are active on SAM learning, whilst we know that only 70% are regularly interacting with our Google Drives to the same level.
It's fantastic. And I also wanted to touch base on a problem that we identified earlier around the lack of assessment data for your new Year 7 intake. So we speak to a lot of schools that are concerned that most EdTech is weighted heavily around GCSE. Leslie, how do you plan on forming a baseline for your new Year 7? And could you see SAM learning playing a part in that?
Yeah, and I must be clear, this is for me one of the huge benefits of SAM learning in that it's not targeted to GCSE. There's wide coverage of all subjects at all key stages, and that's a huge bonus. I think we need to tread a really fine line for our new Year 7s from September. The lack of Key Stage 2 data is an issue in terms of setting. So we're beginning by teaching students in form groups, and initially we will have CATS tests, but we don't want students to feel like they're being examined in every subject. So we'll be using SAM learning to support baseline tests after the first fortnight back in school to give an overview of changes that can be made to long-term plans to better support our young people and also to help with setting.
Thank you. And there are a number of different options available for schools to buy in to help support them with a number of different challenges. Nicole, what challenges do you personally feel SAM learning helps to solve in your school?
The main one is to do with teacher workload. As we know that in this particular dimension that we find ourselves, that teachers are having to plan and record and create a range of resources to ensure that they keep their children engaged, and what we want to remove from the teachers is still that they have a work-life balance, and that quite often they've got their children also working online and they've got to support their families as well. So I found that SAM learning has been, utilised in a way that we've used it for homework, we've used it for assessments. Teachers are not having to create that, and it covers, as has been said, the full breadth of the curriculum in Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. And so therefore, there are enough activities, tasks and resources that can be used for all subjects. Then the teacher doesn't have, the situation of having to mark that and then have to moderate. We don't have to quality assure the quality of the assessment. And then the beauty of it is then the data that is captured in terms of the reports that you can then look at children by gender, by ethnicity. You can have a look at a range of different groups of students to see that, their progress, how many times they've attempted it, whether or not they've attempted it at home, or whether it's been an assigned task. And so the reporting tool of SAM learning really removes all of that workload from our teachers. And secondly, is about providing intervention, small group intervention for, our children. We have used it particularly for our SEN students, where maybe the Key Stage 3 or Key Stage 4 material is too challenging. We've been able to dip into the Key Stage 2 material and be able to provide a bespoke program for them. And then along with, a teaching assistant or a learning support assistant, they've been supported with those SAM learning activities.
And Kate?
Yeah, we've, as Nicole said, we've used it for interventions, and we found what's been really fantastic. It has, the workload of teachers has gone down in terms of marking, but more importantly for us in intervention, you can get data so quickly that you can make the intervention really intensive. So we have intervention for 6 weeks in literacy. It's a 6-week program, and it means if we have to wait for things to be marked, it can considerably take away the content of the intervention. But because the intervention data is constantly being updated as the students do it, we have it all the time for analysis. So we do things like, while students are completing work, the person facilitating the intervention can actually look at the data and see if a particular student is struggling in a certain area, and then call them over and do some one-to-one work in that area. So it's so quick, the intervention can be so targeted and really help these students. And I think also, as Nicole said as well, the workload, just reducing it, that's helped us massively in COVID and with the intervention and with homework. It's been really fantastic.
And what about you, Leslie?
Have I not answered that one about the Key Stage 2? Sorry, Stephanie.
The challenges that you feel Sam Learning personally help with within your school.
Sorry, the challenge of myself just keeping totally on task here. Certainly the engagement outside the classroom environment, and you know, your colleagues have already touched on it, but there is a reason why our usage statistics are so high. Students want to practice on Sam Learning, they want to get higher point scores, they want to move up the leaderboard, and that's a huge shift for us. One of our core values is about being determined, and that's what we're driving with these students. And I celebrate those students who redo the same activity repeatedly. Every time they do it, they're engaging with that material and they can improve because of it. And that's also getting our families on board, because they can watch their children engaging with Sam Learning and be proud of them for it. We celebrate those Sam Learning leaders on the leaderboard, and it's brilliant. Both my colleagues on the panel today have mentioned workload, and it really is a huge challenge that Sam supports. And my teachers were able to start setting tasks after an introduction in a literally 5-minute briefing, which is just incredible. You know, you don't have any kinds of interventions in school that can be taught and then used within 5 minutes. So it's just amazing. And Sam can be used as an exit ticket to check student understanding without having to read through every answer, a chance to assess current progress, a support to narrow gaps, and it's just so intuitive. We've got teachers who are setting a term's worth of revision and intervention right at the beginning of the year so that they can manage their workload, and I think that's phenomenal. And then again, as has already been mentioned, just that work around meeting the needs of individual learners. Too many other EdTech options force you into a one-size-fits-all model, and that means that some of our students who have the most challenges just haven't been able to access materials and resources without significant support. And that's not the case for Sam Learning, due to the ability to differentiate to an individual student level, respond to their own particular needs, or better target support.
Thank you all. And lastly, if a school asked you for one reason that they should buy Sam Learning, what would you tell them? We'll start with you, Kate.
I would say for the value for money in terms of student engagement, we've been using it for 3 years now, and the interest from the students hasn't died down. And I think also linked to that, the fact that it evolves, so that it's for every year group, there's something there that can have a significant value.
Fantastic. And Nicole?
It's me. I'm muting. Sorry. Definitely for me, one reason to use Sam Learning, I feel it's the skills that students are developing in relation to developing those independent learning skills, being able to explore the range of different materials that are there within Sam Learning, and that it caters for the needs of all children. And so, as was said before, it's not one size fits all, because there is you know, from Key Stage 2 up until, you know, mainly Key Stage 4, but there are some Key Stage 5 material. It means that, you know, all children have access to have a look at materials and ultimately think about maybe future aspirations or future subjects that they would like to take, along with, you know, parents being able to see the work that they're learning and to support their learning from home. So definitely, as I mentioned before, it's a win-win for teachers, but also in terms of motivating and engaging children, definitely an excellent resource.
And finally, Leslie.
I think it would be impossible for me to choose one reason. You know, I've been using Sam Learning at schools that I've worked at over the last 10 years, and every time that I've introduced it, it's solved a myriad of problems that the schools had no idea how to tackle. The impact on achievement in each of these schools just speaks for itself, and with a carefully designed strategy that ensures it remains high profile for students and staff, you will get the best buy-in, and it will make a difference to your young people's outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all three of you this afternoon. I'm sure that everyone here has found your input super helpful. So once again, thank you from myself. And for anyone else that would like to get in touch with one of our guest speakers directly, please either let us know in the chat or email me after the webinar today, and I will gladly put you in touch. Okay, so I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce you to our latest short video, welcoming you to Sam Learning, that you will find in the handout section under the control panel to the right-hand side of your screen. Please do take 5 minutes after this webinar should you wish to learn a little more about Sam Learning's award-winning content. You'll also find there our latest brochure and the FFT Impact Report, which demonstrates the positive impact Sam Learning can have on your student outcomes, and in particular, those students who are from disadvantaged backgrounds. Okay, so we're now going to be holding a short question and answer session around the questions that you've asked throughout the webinar today. We'll also be more than happy to arrange a virtual demonstration specific to your school at a later date, either with myself or Craig. So please do feel free to get in touch via phone or email on the details that I will be providing shortly, and also in your webinar pack tomorrow. Okay, so Craig, over to you. How's the question panel looking this afternoon?
Thank you, Steph. It's looking really good. As always, our attendees have asked some really interesting questions, so I'll aim to answer what I can now. But if I don't get around to answering your question due to time, then either myself or Stephanie will be in touch with you soon after the webinar ends today. Okay, so the first question we received was from Clive, who asked, we will likely need something in place for September that we can switch on quickly should there be a second wave of the virus. I have 8 secondary schools in my mat. How quickly can we get them up and running if we choose to purchase Sam Learning? Well, firstly, thank you, Clive, and you bring up a great point. In all of this uncertainty that we mentioned earlier of whether schools were going to open fully at all, there's that extra layer of uncertainty of what happens if what happened in Leicester and what looks likely to happen in a few London boroughs isn't a one-off, and your town or city is placed in full lockdown again. But we as a company are really prepared as much as we can to support schools in a speedy launch of Sam Learning, as it were. We recently partnered with Group Call to use their exporter tool so that your MIS can speak directly to Sam Learning, bringing the setup time to around the 48-hour mark. And with continuous virtual training and planning afterwards, the intuitive nature of Sam Learning really means that in most cases, it's a log on and go type of system with no real technical ability required to use it, other than being able to log into a website. So Clive, rest assured, if Sam Learning is part of your contingency plan, we'll be ready for you. Okay, yep, definitely looking at time because I want to make sure that this webinar stays under an hour. I should be able to fit in just one more question before handing back to Stephanie. So a question that we received from Beverly was, we use GCSE Pod at the moment. Would you say that Sam Learning works well alongside it? And absolutely I do, Beverly. In fact, if any school were limited to buying 2 systems only, Sam Learning and GCSE Pod would be my suggestion as they work perfectly together. GCSE Pod has some really, really good video content that can be used as an aid to teaching a topic really well. And then a number of schools then choose to measure that comprehension of each topic learnt at a much deeper level through Sam Learning, either as a pre-topic assessment in a flipped classroom or as a formative or summative assessment. So yeah, it's a really, really solid combo. Thank you, Beverly. So yeah, keeping an eye on time, I'll now pass the mic back to Stephanie. Again, if your question wasn't answered right now, we'll definitely get back to you soon after the webinar. Thanks again, Steph, over to you.
Thank you, Craig. And that, I believe, brings us to the end of our webinar today. So I do hope that you found it enjoyable and useful. We've really enjoyed presenting it, and all of the webinars that we've been presenting over the last couple of weeks have proven ever so popular since their launch. Therefore, we are going to continue to hold these on topics of your choice moving forward. So on that note, we are holding our next webinar, Closing the Gap, where we're going to go on a deep dive into the world of Sam Learning and how it will help you narrow and close attainment gaps effectively. And that will be held on the 14th of July at 10 AM and 3 PM. Therefore, do not miss out. Register today for your space. And should you have any special topic requests that you would also like to see in the future, please do post your suggestions in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We are here to help our educators, and we want to provide you as much as we possibly can to provide a launch pad for career in life. So please do get in touch if you do have any of those special requests. I'm now going to leave you to watch our video and to download our brochures, which we have provided in the handout section of your control panel. So I will leave the webinar on for a few moments in order for you to do so. We wish you all the very best in these strange times. Take care from myself and Craig. Goodbye.